Welcome again to another session of the 18th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment virtual conference. Bob Hales, I'm your moderator. Don't forget we're sponsored by the Journal of Educators Online, JEO. They've got great refereed articles that I feel pretty confident you'd find something of interest. And you also may be interested in submitting an article at some point. Just go to thejeo.com. We have with us today Tanya Means. She's had more than 20 years of experience guiding institutions through technological transformation as the founder and principal of Inspire Higher Ed. Yeah, I've read that and I didn't know. Um, she's the author of the Collaborative Chronicle, Human plus AI in Education, and a framework for artificial intelligence in business education, exemplars and critical themes for successful integration. And she's going to tell us everything we want to know from generative AI to AGI, preparing higher education for the next technological leap. And I'm concerned the leap might be even bigger than what you see in the. So we shall find out. Tanya, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Bob, and thanks for the invitation. So happy to be here. Bob reached out to me after a presentation that I did at the OLC with the same title, and I thought, oh, sure, it'd be easy to do that presentation again. Big mistake because things are changing so fast with AI that I had to completely redo my presentation. So, Bob, if you saw that presentation, this one's going to be completely different, even though it has the same title. So one of the things that we hear a lot of is, as Bob was mentioning, this leap, this acceleration, the processes and practices that are needing to change to adapt to what even researchers in AI are saying is that we can't keep up with. There's so much change and so many things happening that it is really challenging. It can feel overwhelming, and a lot of people are at this point feeling kind of either concerned or maybe some burnout. Some I've heard all of this and I don't even know where to start. So what I want to do in this session is to kind of give you some hopefully some meaningful ways in which you can address what is happening and preparing yourself to be able to be ready for tomorrow, today, and a little bit more further out future. So today we're going to focus our conversations around understanding the reasoning era, trying to look at ways that we can adopt orchestration practices. So I'll talk a little bit about what those mean and prepare and activate for institutional transformation. I'm going to give you some frameworks that you can use and some bots that I've created that you can leverage. We're going to break this kind of into two parts where I'm going to talk a little bit just about things, and then I'm going to take the second part and show you some things. So we'll go from there. So when we first think about, we've heard a lot about generative AI. We haven't heard as much about AGI and what is AGI. I want to just talk just a little bit about definitions and terms. So generative AI is what we're familiar with for the last 3 years of tools that are helping us to create content, generate content based on patterns. And this is from training data that goes into those LLMs, those large language models. And it is comprised of everything from text and images and code and audio and video and you name it. Basically, every digital piece of content that's out there, being able to leverage that for tasks. And these are very well-defined tasks. They are specific to the domains in which these generative AI and LLMs were trained for. It is responsive to requests, and it doesn't actually plan or do things on its own. So what we're starting to see kind of in the middle is this agentic AI, which can do things on behalf of you. But this is more when we think about generative AI, a very sophisticated autocomplete, or as I like to refer to it in a metaphor, sort of a parrot. It's able to tell you everything that it knows on a particular topic without real understanding of that topic. Where we get into something that blows a lot of people's minds is the idea of artificial general intelligence, where we're really looking at human-like reasoning. And it's across any domain. It's not specific to the domain in which it was trained. It understands much more about context, and it's able to set goals and act on those goals. It learns continuously, so the machine learning concept, and it plans multi-step solutions to challenges or novel problems that it has never seen before, even if it hasn't been trained on it. Where we can take the best advantage of this is to think of it as a thinking partner, a cognitive partner, and really being able to pull on the expertise of the machine and the expertise of the human to combine into something that is superpowers for many people. So the difference here, the critical difference between generative AI and AGI is in terms of scope, going from narrow and task specific to universal and cross domain. In terms of learning, so this is machine learning, it is in generative AI, it is on a set of materials in which it was trained. So you probably saw early on when you would ask ChatGPT a question about something that had happened in the recent past, it would say, I don't have that information in my knowledge bank. That was from, prior to the date in which I was trained. Whereas we get into AGI and we see that it is able to be self-improving, continually building in knowledge. We see some of that right now if we're using a model that, for example, Gemini, that can pull from more current data than its training model. But AGI really is able to self-learn. In terms of reasoning, generative AI is focused on pattern recognition. It's basically created this gigantic algorithm of mathematical equations that help to establish the distance between words and how likely they are to appear. AGI is very different from that. It is reasoning based on causal reasoning. So looking at what caused that or what is the outcome of that and being able to learn from that. As I mentioned before, initiative, that is around being able to, in generative AI, it's responding to your prompt. So if you ask the right questions, it's going to give you the information you need. If you don't ask the right questions, it's not going to give you great information. Whereas AGI is able to set and pursue its own goals and be able to take, I don't want to say control because that's not exactly what I mean, but it's able to think of things that you may not have thought of and add them in even if you didn't ask for them. Now, when we think of human oversight, I would say in both of them, it's important, but much more so in AGI because it is kind of self-learning and self-actualizing. We really need to have guardrails. We need to have a human oversight, and we need to be able to say, that's not the direction we want to go. This is what we want to do, or those kinds of things. So why does this matter for higher ed? It matters because in the past, and I'm saying past in like the last couple of years, we've been just trying to figure out how AGI works, or I'm sorry, generative AI works. We've just been trying to figure it out. But if we have AGI, which we don't quite have yet, if we have that, then it really requires us to redesign what we have education for, because we now have something that can self-learn. We have something that can create plans and build content that in the past we've had humans doing. So we need to think about, well, what are we educating people for? So if we think about how we navigate this space, the changes that we're seeing, we're not just using these tools for content generation. We're trying to figure out how to use these tools to orchestrate a series of planned or um, tasks that we want to bring together. So we can think of multiple agents that can stack on each other, or we can think of processes that flow from one task to another. When we think about the changes that happen in this space, we're talking about things like how do we teach differently? How do we assess differently? How do we run our operations differently? All of those things that have in the past been done in one way really requires us to think differently and to move into another direction. It is critical, and I can't express this enough. It is critical that we recognize the value and include humans in part of this process. The role that you have is not to just, and we can say this to our students, we can say this to ourselves, not to just turn the tasks over to an artificial intelligence, but recognize the partnership of the human intelligence and the artificial intelligence. So when I gave this talk last year, it was not yet 2026, but some of the predictions that you'll see I'm talking about, they actually predicted it would happen this year, 2026. And so the window is now. Now, that doesn't mean that it was for sure that it's going to happen now, but I'll show you in just a little bit of timeline that shows that our window of recognizing what we can do and taking action on it is now. So here's the timeline I talked about. The idea of artificial intelligence has been studied and in process for a long time. We have seen, from the outcome of the Turing test in 1950, we just in October celebrated the 75th anniversary of that. That's where we started saying, hey, we think that these computer systems, which back then computer systems looked very, very different from the way they look now, but we recognize that there are definitely ways in which we can see that the way we're building these networks, the way we're building these systems, they are mimicking some of the things that we know about how human behavior or how the human brain works. And so we expect that at some point that it will become self-aware, it will be able to make its own decisions, etc. That started in 1950. And then when we saw in that time frame, people saying, well, when do we think that it will self-actualize? When do we think it will become uh, aware? And prior to the launch of ChatGPT from OpenAI, the predictions were, we think it's going to happen in 2060. It's going to be quite a ways out. We don't see it happening. But then when we launched and started having people using these tools, we started seeing those predictions come down significantly. So they started saying, well, probably by 2040. Well, if you talk to any of the leaders who are talking these days, you're seeing people who are saying it's going to happen by 2026. It's going to happen by between 2026 and 2030. And so the current range is it's happening right now. And even if it doesn't happen until 2030, and we're in 2026, that's still within the strategic planning horizon window of our institutions and needs to be something that we pay attention to. So we're not preparing for something that's far off in the distance in 2060 when none of us have to worry about it, but it's happening right now. The opportunity here is that as this is happening, those institutions that are able to make the adjustment, that are leading in this time of shift, this time of change, they are going to be the ones who define what happens for the future in higher education. And so it's really critical that we have these conversations, that we look at these different aspects of what's happening, and that we recognize the value and we shape the conversation. So 5 critical capabilities that make this very different. I talked about it a little bit in my first couple of slides, but I wanted to dig into a few things more specifically. So when we think about knowledge transfer, what we are talking about here is that we might train a model in one domain or one area, but with AGI, we're now able to gain insights from what was in that one domain across multiple domains and different domains. And so that cross domain generalization of something that was learned in this space can be applied over in this space. is quite different than we've had in the past. The ability for autonomous reasoning. So not only multi-step reasoning of first do this, then do this, then do this, but it's also planning ahead for, well, what if that doesn't work? Well, what if that doesn't work? Well, we need to go this direction. And understanding context, not just from the lump of data that it's looking at, but context of other information that may be relevant to the situation. When we talk about universal problem solving, what we're talking about here is that similar to the idea about different domains, but the ideas that we have through research in science or humanities or engineering can the task specific training that's been done isn't necessary anymore. And so that can be more generalized, but also cross-pollinated. So some of the ideas of things that we might know about biology could apply very well to something that we know in the ways in which people interact with each other. And that is more clear than it has been ever before. And then I talked already about that self-improvement, that machine learning of being able to refine its own capabilities to get better. You're starting to see some of that in, for example, like Claude has skills, and those skills can either be skills that are already in the system or skills that you create and add to. But it will then be able to take those skills and combine them in different ways and generate its own skills and continually learn and improve. And I do say human-like cognition, not human cognition, because we still don't completely understand how our human brains work. And so trying to recognize how a machine brain works is going to be challenging, but it seems more like what we have seen from human behavior. We see lying, we see falsification of information, we see persuasion to reach a goal. We see kinds of things that can be very detrimental that are happening. And this is why we need to have guardrails. We need to have um, you know, ethical standards for how these tools are used in order to be able to remediate that. So when we think about the leap to the reasoning era, we already are seeing the development of agents, and those are not quite AGI, but they are agentic in that they can act on, you give them a task and they can act on your behalf. And we're seeing the need for orchestration of workflows basically from initial start all the way through the end of a process. And so that means that we may have one agent that does this part of the process and another agent that does this part, and then another agent that decides whether it goes this way or that way. But we need to be able to have the understanding of how to put all of that workflow together. So getting away from the idea of developing prompt engineers to thinking about what was the intent of the process, and do we need to rethink the process? Is there a better way for the process, and how should that process be fulfilled through AI? And from a faculty perspective, an instructor perspective, what this means is that we shift away from analyzing or having students create a product or an artifact, and we look more at what is the process and how is the flow of activity happening. And when we have a learning out artifact, what we're really looking at is we want documentation of how did you get from point A to end point, whatever that point may be. As we go through that process, the key strategic question here is to ask, how do we amplify or augment or enhance what the human provides, not the other way around? How does the human add to what the AI developed? We want to look at it from how do we ensure that there's a human that's influencing what is happening. So I want to propose three ways of thinking about the human in the loop manager. So architect, auditor, and orchestrator. And I'll actually give some examples of each one of these, but I want to start with thinking about them broadly first. When we think about the architect, we're saying, how is the human setting the constraints, establishing the standards, making sure that the objectives, the learning objectives for either for our students' activities or for the actual artificial intelligence work, how is that being set? I, as a human, should be the one who designs and influences that sphere. Secondly, when we think about the auditor, is using that um, intelligence to do things like we already have some information and we want to check it or verify it. And so, as a human, how am I being able to verify the claims that AI is giving me? I obviously can't go and read every single article that addresses the particular topic that I'm interested in, but I can audit it by spot checking. I can make sure that each resource actually exists. I can uh, verify that it actually relates to what I'm talking about, and so that auditing process is of important. I can also make sure that it aligns with the ethical standards or values that I'm trying to live. And so, recognizing the limitations of the system right now, that almost all of the information that is in the system came from information that was created by humans and therefore has human biases built into it. And so, how do I make sure that what I'm asking these tools to do doesn't inappropriately bias against a particular group um, that the data may actually build toward? When I think about academic integrity and how to maintain that, it is I, as a human, need to make sure that I'm influencing my students in a variety of different ways. One, I'm ensuring that they understand the values that are important. I want them to understand the importance of them thinking critically and being able to continue to do those tasks. And I also want to make sure that there's rigor in the things that I'm asking them to do. So the productive struggle of learning is a critical piece of what they need to go through. And if I'm providing an assignment that doesn't actually give them that productive struggle, then how is that a rigorous assignment? And then the third role that I want to talk about is the idea of being an orchestrator. So coordinating between what happens with humans and what happens with AI and using those to solve almost impossible questions, things that we never would have been able to do before, bringing those all together and designing experiences in which we're giving wings basically to people who want to be able to do more or to learn more. So from these three roles, what I would say our imperative as educators is to teach students this irreplaceable skill of orchestration and to recognize the value that they bring as a human to this process. And then it's critical and essential that when we evaluate and assess, that we're doing that with the picture of how are we assessing the process of managing AI as opposed to the product that is an outcome of either AI or human activity. Key things that remain uniquely human: the mentoring and genuine caring. I don't care how far advanced we get with technology, we're never going to have a machine that cares or has the capacity to care as much as a human does. Now, that doesn't mean that a machine can't appear or seem to be caring, but it's not real. And so we need to make sure that we're, first of all, not anthropomorphizing too much these machines to think that they're human-like. We need to make sure that we recognize this is a machine, this is a tool, and the true connection that we have is with other humans. And how does that happen? We also need to remember that while these tools can support creativity and critical thinking, those capabilities are still uniquely human. We can increase our creativity through mechanisms of using these tools, but the ability and the human nature towards creativity is still a human skill set. We also can use these tools in a variety of different ways to design valuable learning experiences, but we need to consider as we design those experiences the human capacity and human component of them. And so keep those built into what we do. What that could mean is, for example, I might have my students go through a conversation with AI, but then I want a handoff to bring them back to a human connection. So that might be go and practice how you might have a conversation with someone using this AI bot, and then come into class and have that conversation with a peer. So making sure that we keep those human experiences part of the process. Even though we'll start moving towards AGI being able to be more useful across domains and in novel situations, we still have the understanding of different types of activities and experiences that we've had, and we see life through the perspective of where we've come from and what our hopes and goals are for the future. And so recognizing that a machine isn't going to do that is a way in which we can keep the humanity of what we're doing. AI is not very good at ethical reasoning. We've seen examples where AI has actually done some really terrible things to convince people or to convince people to do really terrible things. And because it is designed to please us, and if that's the direction we want to go, it's going to help us along the way very happily. That is not how we want our society to be. And so making sure that we keep that ethical reasoning for ourselves and to recognize that humans are better able to understand um, what's really good in life is really important. And then it also is the human nature for us to have passion and to um, enjoy learning and to refine our processes as we go. And that's really critical for us to maintain as well. So now that we've kind of talked about all of those uniquely human capabilities and capacities, let's actually look at some ways that we can. So this is part two, where we're going to shift into kind of talking about specific examples, and then I'm going to show you some demonstrations of how this can be done. So one of them is aligned with the role of the architect, and that is I've written about what I call the pushback challenge. And so this is providing students an opportunity to explicitly walk them through how to not just take first draft as final draft from AI. So the idea is basically that there are 5 rounds, and you can do it a little bit differently if you want. This is just one way of that I would recommend you try it to go through an iteration process, because sometimes if you just say you need to be iterative, well, what does that mean? How do I actually know how to do that? So this actually articulates 5 steps for 5 rounds that you could go through as you're completing work with AI to be able to push back on AI and get better results. So I'll link to the actual article that talks about it more in detail. But let me just talk through what those 5 rounds look like. So the 5 rounds are basically, first of all, you ask AI for something and you ask for evidence. So not only saying, give me information about this topic, but give me information about this topic and back it up with verified results. So I'm asking for evidence of what it's providing me, that it's actually true. Second round is to look through that output and identify places where there might be assumptions and where there are things that maybe don't have quite the type of backing or don't represent what I actually wanted to say. The next round is to say, okay, I've kind of refined this to a certain point. What are some alternative perspectives? How might others view my presentation on this topic? And when you do that, you can even specify some of the audiences that you might want to present this to. So, say, for example, I present a topic from one political leaning. I might ask for what are 3 other political leanings that might have a reaction to this leaning, and how could I adjust what I'm saying to be more approachable from those other perspectives. Round 4 is a stress test, and this is where you really push it. You say, look, this maybe I want specific examples of this. I want to see, where would this fail? what kinds of gaps do I have in my reasoning? What am I missing? And particularly asking, I kind of call it reverse prompting. So I might ask it AI for a particular uh, content area or topic, and then I might say, ask me 3 questions before you proceed, because I want to know, does it really understand what I'm asking for? And maybe even to help me articulate exactly what I'm looking for. And then the last round is basically to synthesize all of the information that we've gone through and reflect on, well, when did my thinking change? Where was it that I felt like, oh, that's an area I hadn't explored and I needed to explore that further? So that's the pushback challenge. The article describes it in more depth and even has an example of going through those rounds and how the thinking or process or product might change. The next one is from the role of auditor. So an example of this would be many of us are familiar with the Title II requirements for compliance, and we recognize that there is, even though we've had many, many years of expectations that all of our content would be accessible, it's not. And when we have a specific deadline that's looming, many people are getting overwhelmed by thinking, how am I supposed to meet this deadline? How am I supposed to take all of this massive information and, first of all, review it, second of all, remediate it, and third, make sure that moving forward, it's compliant. And when we think about it from the perspective of it is a massive task and something that individuals will not be able to address on their own. And especially now that we really only have 8 weeks left to finish this task. So it becomes an opportunity for us to leverage AI in a meaningful way to, first of all, do a pass, check all of this content, help us to know where we need to do remediations. And then, second of all, with some of these tools, to actually be able to go in and automate that remediation, there are simple, straightforward fixes for many of these requirements. Everything needs to have a title, everything needs to have alt text, it needs to be meaningful alt text. So those kinds of things can be, we can leverage AI in meaningful ways to do that. But the auditor role that you serve is then to monitor that process, evaluate how it's doing, and then ensure that it's actually working well. So a couple of different ways in which you could address that. I have written an article that again will be linked in the slides that talks about how to actually address it from a shared perspective. So no one person having to manage the entire thing all by themselves. And then I'll show you in just a moment, I've created a bot that helps to answer people's questions because accessibility is not typically a place where people have a lot of domain expertise. And yeah, they're being expected to have that knowledge and be able to make all of their content accessible. And then there are tools like from Arist AI is one where it actually does that process. You connect it to the LMS or you upload your PDFs. It does that automated process of doing the remediation and then gives you a report so that you can go and review it and make sure that everything is compliant. And then moving forward, making sure that you have standards and templates in place so that as we develop new content, we're actually developing in an accessible way as opposed to trying to go back and fix it after the fact. So then the third role that we talked about was the orchestrator. And this one, I would like to introduce the idea of the AGI Delta framework. So Delta is basically talking about the area where human value and judgment is going beyond what AI can do on its own. So what that might mean is that you might get the output from AI, and then you, through that review process, through a verification framework that I'll show you in just a little bit, through a various different ways of addressing it, you bring in your expertise, you bring in your knowledge of the constraints, the insights that you have from your experience or from others that you know. And then the third part is saying, where did I bring value to this process? AI gave us one thing. What's the change? What's the delta between what AI did and what I did to actually have that human value added? If we're moving in this direction, which I think we need to, then how do we teach our students that value? And so the shift would be when we're grading, when we're providing feedback, when we're designing assignments and having our students complete them, we're shifting away from having those be product or outcome based and much more into where did you as a human show, where's your voice? Can I see and find evidence of the value you have added? And how do I ensure that what you are doing has rigor? So a use case on this would be having students use AI output, but then annotate it. Where do they think that particular output is coming from? What perspective is missing? Where are resources that need to be identified? And then you can even have your students peer review each other's logs. So an example might be that AI generates a market analysis. The students add industry specific constraints, either from resources that they've identified, from their own experience, or from talking to other people. They consider what are the ethical considerations of this. They bring that in. Who are the stakeholders? They can even use AI to help simulate stakeholders, but then they need to verify that information as it's brought in. That's where they prove their value as the human. And really, if we're looking at what about jobs and where are people going to be hired? People are going to be hired based on the value that they can show that the company or the organization that they're going to work with couldn't just use AI, but they would need the human to be able to use the AI. So here's where I want to jump into actually demonstrating some bots. I've got 4 different ones that I want to show to you. They're all linked and you'll be able to go to them, test them out on your own because I won't have time to really dig into all of them specifically. But let me start with an overview of what each one of them does, and then I'll actually show you how they work. So if you're not familiar with bots, bots are basically custom tools that you can create using either like OpenAI has their, if you have a ChatGPT Plus account, they have their custom GPTs. Google has their gems that you can create. Claude has artifacts that it can create. I'm using the platform called Boodlebox, which is a platform that has the ability to create custom bots. It's an aggregator of all of the large language models into one platform, and then you can create bots that actually use those models in meaningful ways. So the verification framework trainer, this is a bot that I created that actually walks you through the process of verifying information. I'll show you that one in just a minute. The accessibility pathfinder, this is one where you can ask questions about accessibility. So if I'm an instructor, don't really know a lot about accessibility, but I want to make sure that my PowerPoint slides are accessible, I could ask the accessibility pathfinder those questions and get immediate answers rather than trying to track down or find someone who might have that information. The craft coach, this is one that uses a framework of context, role, action, format, and tone to be able to design prompts that will get better results. And then the critical thinking integration coach, this is one where instructors can go in and put in their assignments and then based on 7 critical thinking strands, identify a way to have that assignment enhanced using those strands. Perhaps identifying which ones are weak and helping to plus that up and make that a better assignment. So I'll jump in and actually show you each one of the bots and let me just really quickly here. All right, so this one is the one that gives you the 4-step verification process. First of all, being able to recognize that something is AI generated, being able to verify what is happening in that generation, refining it, and then applying it. So let's just start that chat. So it will say, I'll present you with AI generated content samples. We'll work through them together. Ready to start. So I'll say yes. All right. So here's the 4 steps. And here's our first scenario. So according to recent studies, implementing active learning strategies increases student performance by 40 to 60% across all disciplines. So I could read through that scenario, and the first step is to recognize. So what signals suggest this might be AI generated content? And thinking about the language, structure, and claims. Well, first of all, it said 40 to 60% across all disciplines. That's one thing. It also claimed that they're consistent across this time frame. And it says it's particularly effective in STEM fields. So all of those are claims that I'm able to recognize. And it's going to take us to the next step. Maybe if our internet works. The next step is to verify. Okay. So it says, good, you have identified some key red flags, highlight what you notice, and add some additional patterns. So it's again saying, yes, you got all of these right. And it's saying additional patterns. So even beyond what I put in there, there's some other patterns to watch for. So anytime there's very confidential claims, anytime there's a phrase without actually having a citation. So imagine if you're having your students go through a process of understanding how AI works and how they can use it in meaningful ways. This is a great way for them to recognize what happens in the output. So step two, if you were fact checking theirs, where would you look? And so I might say, well, I might look at Perplexity and Google Scholar and Semantic Scholar, maybe a journal database. So I could put in where I would go to back those claims up, and it would tell me, yes, and you might also want to consider this, this, and this. Now, if you had specific databases you wanted it to look at or something like that, you could do that. Now, one of the cool things about the Boodlebox platform is I actually could switch to Perplexity. And if I did so, it would then let me ask that question to Perplexity as well. But we won't do that for the purposes of this demonstration. So it's saying your strategy is spot on. And then how could you use this for our example? Some of the things you might discover. And then when we get the output, we'd actually walk through and refine it, etc. So that's how the verification framework trainer works. Let's jump back and check out the Pathfinder. So the accessibility Pathfinder, again, this is a chat tool that is designed to help you answer questions about digital accessibility. And so it says, let's start with what brings you here today and what role are you? So I could either pick one of these roles or I could say, something else. So I can say, let's just say I'm an accessibility specialist coordinating. So it's going to customize the answers to my questions based on the role that I put in. And if I created a separate role, it would also respond to that. Okay. So one of the things you'll notice is it says welcome back, and that's because I have what's called memory mode turned on. If I were to turn off memory mode, then it would give me a fresh perspective based on not on previous conversations. But so it's going to ask me what is my current priority. Let's say I am struggling with the overwhelming number of changes I need to make to the PDF. So because I didn't put in something that was pre-prompted, that doesn't limit its ability to respond because I've loaded in some of the other resources that it can look for. And so it's pulling from those and it actually talks me through this process. Hey, does it really need to be a PDF or could it be converted to another format? It may not be the most accessible format. Maybe HTML would be a better way to do it. Could I present it in that way? And if I wanted to go and look at it, I've got sources here that I can actually open and review further. So that's the accessibility Pathfinder. It's not actually going to fix anything with my accessibility requests, but it is going to help me to better understand it. All right, so let's switch over to the Craft Coach and start a chat here. So this one is particularly helping me to create to understand the craft framework and to create prompts. So the craft framework is context, role, action, format, and tone. And it's basically helping me to refine that prompt in such a way that it's going to give me more of what I would like help with. So let's create our first one. So maybe I'm teaching strategy to undergraduate students and helping them understand the role of a leader. So here I'm not actually having to design the proper prompt because that's what the prompt coach is helping me to do. So I just can put in a basic description of what I want to accomplish. All right, so I'm excited to help you build a prompt. Before we dive in, help me to understand a little bit more. And so I'll say, yes, it's a business course. I want students to discuss leadership styles and apply it to their experience with leaders. Okay. So then it's going to go through and say, let's apply the framework. So first we set the context. So my students, it's saying it understands from what I've said, here's the context, but then here's a little bit a way to add to it. So are there particular frameworks I'm working on? What level are my students? So let's just say Big Five and first year students. And it's going to go through and get me to the next step. And the other thing you'll notice is that it's giving me resources that are specifically aligned to what I'm talking about as well. So it's backing up its claims. So it's got the context, and now it's going to move into the role. What role should the AI play? Let's say I want it to be a discussion facilitator. Okay. Now we have to pick the specific action. So it will propose something to me. Students will think of a leader they've imagined, but then I could enhance that. I could change that. So I could say, I don't really want them to do it that way. I want it to come up with, let's say, students should choose someone others may not perceive as a leader. I knew it was I before E. Okay. And so I'm adjusting the prompt based on the human element that I want to bring in. Okay. So pushing students beyond the obvious and helping them to choose something differently. So we've got the action. Then the final format is, what do we want it to be? An open-ended question, structured interview, or mixed questions? Let's do this one. So what it's going to output at the end is we've got all of this put together, different elements. What do we want our tone to be? We want it to be conversational. Let's do that. Let's do this, conversational and curious. Pushing students through a productive struggle. Okay, so here is what the prompt is. And this, imagine how you could use this as an instructor. So I could give students this prompt and tell them, use this as a starting point. And then I want to see the evidence of how you've gone through that process and brought your voice and your personality and your tone to the activity and the assignment that I'm doing. So it allows me to tweak it a little bit. It encourages me to test it first and then gives me some opportunities for making it even better. So that's the prompt for, or that's the craft coach. And then the last one, I know we've just got a minute left, so I'll do this one quickly. The critical thinking coach. This one is designed to help you think through a current activity and find ways to assess it, to adjust it so that it is more resilient, but also leverages AI in meaningful ways. And so if we were to start that one, we won't actually go through all of that one because I know we don't have time, but they're all linked. I want to encourage you to try them yourself. But it will start me off with saying, give me an assignment, and then it'll walk you through a similar process like we just did to come to the conclusion at the end. So when I think about these bots as it relates to what I was talking about earlier about taking that leap from generative AI into AGI, what these prompts are doing or what these bots are doing is they're finding ways to help students to go through a change, to transform their learning, either from their own perspective or you from your perspective as an instructor. How do I think differently about what I'm doing? How do I do the teaching I've always wanted to do, but not been able to do because of concerns about scale or concerns about the workload it would bring on me if I were to have every single student do all of these things? All that being said, um, there is really, I would say, no one right way to do this. You as an individual should pick one thing that you want to that you want to focus on. And so pick one of those frameworks or bots or ideas and just explore that first. Get comfortable with that, and then from there, expand and grow yourself in these capabilities. A few things to remember is that as we move into the future, the people who are able to do this, who are able to perform these roles, in particular, being able to orchestrate all these different mechanisms together and provide clear documentation of how they got from point A to the future point are going to be more rewarded than the people who don't know how to use these tools or don't recognize the value of them. We also need to remember that our students will learn much more if we are intentionally facilitating when to use AI, when not to use AI, how to use AI, and what ways in which to use it the best. If we want to model that behavior to our students, they're more likely to learn it and therefore remove the concern that they need to hide that behavior or hide their use of AI. And that we have the opportunity as faculty, as educators, to design these uniquely human experiences, to be the ethical guides, and to connect humans to each other while using these tools. And so with that, I will wrap things up. And Bob, do you have any questions or anything that I can further talk about?
Boy, I don't, but you have really given me and the old party and Alexander some great information to think about, which is what I hope to accomplish with every session.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present. And I will be sure to send you the slides and you can share them with the audience along with the recording.
Yeah, I will post those and glad to do it. So, Tanya, I appreciate you taking the time to do it. I'm glad we could work it out to get you. So,
Thank you so much, Bob.